Howdy all you delicious people, I'm here today to review Wolf from 1994. So Jack Nicholson's character, Will, is becoming a monster, not because he was to have been bitten by a wolf after a car accident had occurred, but Will is becoming a monster because he's off and on again throughout this entire movie in fear of losing his job. He's in fear of losing his marriage. He is in fear of a man that is basically, in any way he can, steal Will's life away from him, as well as also Will's new love, Laura, as he has gone on to give up on his marriage because of the affair that was to go on and occur. Will, we come to find, is this agent of these authors, and he is to within this film come up with some kind of strategy to have leverage and have because of his experience figure out ways to try and manipulate his boss to keep his job instead of going off to Eastern Europe, where Will goes on and states that this is a job that no one wants, but it's either to take this job that no one wants or to not have a job at all. So Will is to try to go on and try to be a good person, even though logically he probably doesn't think of himself as one. But then eventually he is to go on and be sleeping and waking up in these forests with blood on his hands, and he just doesn't quite understand why, which is to make him feel like a bad guy. Having fingers being placed in his blazer, not quite understanding why that is to have gone on and occurred, making him again a bad guy. So, Will goes on to handcuff himself and put himself in a barn, hoping that he can cage his beast. Eventually, going on to a doctor and getting an amulet that does what, I'm not quite sure, because it never seems to go on and be quite understood why this amulet is to be draped upon him. Never really rationally made sense to me. So, Will, by the end of this film, ends up kind of creating his own uh, just evil within this film by going from protege to, dare say, a person equal to him in every sense of the form, to really have this to be a rather interesting third act or way to finish up this film. The only problems that I feel are within this movie is we have at one point where Will is to go on and become a werewolf and is to be chasing a deer. And obviously, like, the whole chase scene going on with this deer is happening during the day, obviously, which made no sense to me. We also go on and have a point where they are to try to explain away our characters by the end of the film with Michelle Pfeiffer as Laura here. And I was just going like, I don't quite understand exactly what they're saying here, as Laura is to possibly have it be explained to her that there were some airplane tickets and stuff to be done. And so, like, what does any of this mean? And and so this movie, of course, is to go on and just be rather long-winded, so I can probably understand people probably going on and probably processing this movie as something boring. As well as also we get into the specialty abilities of this character probably way too long. As well as also there's certain times where it's like, okay, like this character is supposed to be this wolf, but oftentimes we just kind of see the yellow of the eyes and not quite much else to really definingly say this is a werewolf or not at certain points of this film. Even to go on and have Will's nemesis in this movie by the tail end of it, like he mostly just has the yellow eyes, and we are to go on and not quite understand why that is to just be that way for so long. I guess it just has to make sense for the story. But anyways, I thought that this movie was solid, okay to good. I enjoyed it. You can go on, and if you do not want to rent this movie or whatever, because I'm sure that that is the only real means available, you can go on to an app called Zelifonic, Zelivonic, or Moopzy, Moopzzi, and be able to watch this movie for absolutely free. I am to go on and like the fact that like Will eventually goes on and is to find Laura in this film, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, and he is to honestly just say how like rude she is and this and that and whatever have you, and but he like condescendingly like he says that she's beautiful, but then also that like she's rude and a number of other things, but that everyone should just go on and forgive her for how she is on the inside because of how she looks on the outside. And like that is kind of very much connected to Will's character, how it seems as much as possible he is to try to be the good guy, but inside like he is um to have this dark side about him that he's trying to figure out how to uh, contain. But anyways, so which probably is to go on and make both Will and both Laura such an even match within this film. So with that said, I think it's about that time to just brush off into spoilers and call this one a review. Let me know in the comments below what is to be your favorite werewolf film or favorite Universal monster movie, as I'm to make my way into finding kind of like the monster movie of the week and trying to go on and finding some very much more creative titles. Like there was to go on and get um, an interest in me, like covering the original Invisible Man movie. I want to eventually go on and cover the Bram Stoker Dracula film. There is to go on and be some oddballish like titles that I feel that I can go on and eventually review at some certain points. I had seen this film called Brotherhood of the Wolf, and that bizarrely was to be an interesting bit of tale. That was to make people probably compare that to the movie Blood or the video game Bloodborne. So I may go on and look into that. It seems I'm not quite sure if that's going to end up being a thing because I've gone on and cited so many kind of wide variety of movies and shows and stuff that eventually never have the light of day. There was a movie that was gonna go on and do at some point called Full Eclipse, I think, and that movie is to be really wild and weird and what have you. But that is to kind of somewhat be a werewolf film. Uh, Really, other than that, I may go on and just try and find some kind of supernatural or Universal monster movies that are to go on and at this point make some sense to talk about in the future of these movie and show reviews. So, let me know in the comments below what is to be your favorite monster movie and what have you. But otherwise, I think it's about that time to just go into the full-on spoilers about this, because I think it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. Definitely go on and write something in the comment section because it does help out the video. Logically, if you have not already done any number of things that are to be the processes of if you enjoy any of this or if you want to tune in to more things in the future, go ahead and hit all those buttons that are be at the bottom of the video below. But let's go on and pause this video here so I can get out all my notes and cast lists and wherever I insist is going to help me go on and break down this movie. So let's pause here and let me push on into the spoilers. Normally I'd feel that I'd have like a bit of like better breakdown of this film, but like I feel like I've kind of got on to do quite a bit of talking about this film. So I like at this point, like I feel if I'm to go on and state any more, I think I'm just gonna go on and backpedal over something that I've already said. Suspicions of that. So with that said, let's pause here and let's just get into spoiler time. Okay, spoilers everybody. So the beginning of this tale starts out in Vermont. Will, through a snowy-like environment, is to make his way home, where it seems that he is to go on and accidentally run over a animal of some kind. Will makes his way out of his car, finds a stick, is to poke the animal, curious if it is still alive or not, so that way he can go on and drag this animal off the road, so that way no one else runs it over or no one else is to get into a car accident because of this animal existing upon the road. So, as Will goes on to poke this animal, it seemingly doesn't move, but the wolf's eye opens and then closes without Will realizing it. So, Will grabs the leg of this animal to then have the animal bite him on the hand. Will then goes on to get seemingly away from the animal as it is to walk off, and Will is to be clutching his hand to then go on and find out that this wolf is not alone, that there seems to be a number of wolves that are within the shadows with their glowing eyes. Will makes his way back into his car to then make his way back home, and so the next thing we see is that Will is talking to his wife Charlotte, and they're talking about the contracts they had signed and how exactly did he pull that off. Will explained he had to pull off the contract signing by doing it the old-fashioned way, which is to just logically beg people in order for them to sign these contracts. Will makes his way to his job to then meet up with both Roy and Mary, his secretary. Will goes on to ask his secretary about having a doctor's appointment, which, of course, Roy ends up saying, like, oh, are you sick? And Will's like, no, I have a dog bite, or I have a wolf bite, an animal bite, so I definitely want to go on and make a doctor's appointment. So Mary goes on and tells Will that it seems that there is no actual doctor's appointment, that if anything, there is going to be one by noon if he requests it, and so Will agrees. Roy ends up stating to Will how there is a party at Adler's place. Adler is to go on and be their boss. And Will has no real true interest in being at Adler's party because he is to go on to realize that he doesn't want to go to a party that could probably lead to him getting fired, him getting the axe, and possibly have a number of people either witness that or to be in a party that happens. And Roy is going on and telling Will, it's like, well, hey, if you leave, I'm going with you. And Will goes on to state to Roy, it's like, well, hey, like, I advise you to do no such thing. So Mary ends up telling Will that a author named Maud is within his office, and so Will ends up seeking Maud out. So Will and Maud have this conversation here, and Maud is to go on and say, like, well, hey, uh, Will, like, if you're leaving, I'm going along with you. And Will is to be very appreciative of that. And Will goes on and states, like, well, I do have this protege that I have, and I feel if I leave, like, he may go on and follow along with me. And that is not actually going to be Roy, it's to be a character named Stuart. And so Maud turns to Will, it's like, well, hey, like, let's go on and let's speak to this protege. So the two of them make their way to Stuart, as Stuart is just to be so buttering up to Maud here, going on and stating that in his youth he had read one of Maud's books, What About Girls, oddly, and Stuart is to mention how, like, he is to go on and to have realized that, like, he wanted to become a writer, but he realized he had no talent for it, so, like, he just became what he became within this business. So eventually, Maud, Stuart, and Will make their way into Stuart's office, and they end up asking about Maud's contract and the specificities, the specifics of her contract. So eventually, the further and further there's to be some butt kissing going on here between Stuart and Maud. Maud eventually goes on and leaves after saying that Stuart is a loyal man, and he is to go on and be a rare read, and has great taste in authors, and then goes on and leaves. Will turns to Stuart and like, man, you are a really good ass kisser. And Stuart is like, I kiss him like I see him. And so we then transition to Will at his doctor's appointment, where we have the doctor that is to be like questioning whether or not that Will had gotten bitten by a wolf. The doctor is to ask Will, it's like, do you think that it was a husky or some kind of other dog rather than a wolf? And Will is like, no, I'm definitely sure it was a wolf. And so the doctor goes on about raccoon and snake bites that go on and eventually deal with brain damage. And uh, Willis to go on and ask, like, well, are those people okay? And the doctor says in kind, it's like, no, people have brain damage. So we transition here to Will forcing his way into Alden's party. Whether he really wants to be involved in this or not, he's there anyways. So as Will, Charlotte, and Stuart are going on and overhearing about the world possibly ending if there's no rain in forests, and that art is dead, and so on and so forth. And so Will goes on and starts talking about pop culture and daytime television and Oprah, and how women, it seems, are cutting off the wing of their husbands and so on and so forth. And we of course go on to have Stuart like, hey, it's time to fill up the drink. Yes, it is time to fill up the drink. So as they sit down by the table and people are consuming food, Will has no real true interest in it because of how bloody the meat is. And uh And Stewart has to tell Will, it's like, relax, eat something, like at least get a meal out of this. Like, because yeah, definitely try to get something out of this meal if you're gonna go on and probably lose your job anyways. You might as well just kind of get some kind of consolation prize out of this event. So we have a person kind of tap Will on the shoulder and say to him that Mr. Alden will see him now. And Will turns to Charlotte and Stewart and states, never send no for whom the bell tolls. It tolls." And so they end up telling Will to like remember who he is and charm him, and you can be charming when you want to. Yeah, okay. So, but at least he's kind of getting a face to face with Mr. Alden, and at least it's not to go on and have him to be fired via voice message or otherwise any other thing. So, because you would think with Alden's money, he would just send someone else to fire Will instead of doing it face to face. So, Will meets with Alden, and Alden offers Will a cigar, and Will is like, "Oh, don't mind if I do." I don't think ever legit like does he actually like I don't know if there is an actual lighting of the cigar. No, yeah, they do light the cigar, but I'm just like, but Will obviously doesn't enjoy it. Like he goes on by the end of it as soon as Alden leaves, and he throws the cigar onto the ground because he probably doesn't even want the cigar. He just feels obligated to take it just because of Alden's offer. Probably didn't like the cigar whatsoever. Anyways, so Alden goes on and speaks with Will about an Eastern Europe company that after this takeover is to happen with their business, that Alden sees Will as going to Eastern Europe. And this, of course, is a job that Will definitely does not want. And no one wants this job, but Will is to be offered this, at least as some consolation prize, instead of having him completely get fired here. So Alden says to Will that there's nothing personal here, you know that, and that Alden is to say to Will that Will has taste and individualism, and that's just the thing that Alden just does not like. And if anything, he sees those things as a handicap. And so Will ends up going on and asking Alden, like, well, hey, who's my successor? And Alden is to be like, well, like your successor is to be a person who has drive and hustle and a 52 carat ambition and has been nagging me day and night until I give him your job. So Will goes on to say to Alden, and so, well, if I've learned anything in the last 30 years of being just kind of part of this job, that treat your authors as human beings. Don't stint on review copies. Don't give them deadlines because all you'll get is just rough drafts. And Alden will look at Will here like, okay, I'll remember that. So Alden is to say that Will is a nice person, but that's the reason why he's replacing him. And he hopes that Will look into Eastern Europe, which of course he won't. And so Alden separates from Will, walks off nearby these horses. As Alden disappears, Will throws the cigarette away, even though he says that he'll finish it. He'll finish it by throwing it in the ground. as Will starts to make his way closer and closer to this horse, all of a sudden the horse starts to go wild. Everybody is to start to be in a panic. Will is to thrust his hands in the air, be like, okay, what's going on here? Like, he's not to be quite sure that he is to be the problem here. But so, all of a sudden, Will is to kind of comb off to the side here into this brush and start to be grabbing on his chest. Supposedly having some anxiety attack or some kind of issue of some kind. Probably just be legitimately heartbroken by the fact that he is to go on, and regardless of what he thinks he has as far as leverage and this and that going on, that he is going to lose his job. And maybe the stresses of that has just kind of built up over time. So, Will makes his way from out of this brush to sit down, and someone is to hand him a drink and says, drink it. And Will does, and so the person says, good boy. Why don't you just pat him on the head? God dang it. For how, like, rude that is. So, Will turns to this person and says, I'm afraid I finished your drink. And the person who is to acknowledge said conversation with Will is to go on and be Laura, Alden's daughter. So, Laura is to go on and say, like, what are you, the last civilized man? And Will is like, no, I'm just embarrassed by the fact that he was to go on and just have the issue of which that he was to go on and have, and she was to be kind to him in some way. And so Laura goes on and states that there's a number of people at this party that are in some shape or form all take drugs, and so Will's little anxiety is to just be Tuesday for her. So Will says that Laura is very kind, and Laura's like, no, I'm not. So the two of them introduce themselves. Laura explains that she is to be Laura, Alden's daughter, and Will is to explain that he's Will and that it's nice to meet her. Laura goes on to look at Will and is to state, like, he just fired you, didn't he? And Will is like, well, demoted is more the word here. And so Will says that he has to choose between a job no one wants or no job at all. And so Laura's like, well, what are you going to do? And Will's like, well, I'll probably take the job that no one wants. And Will is like, well, I think I'm, because of my age, is kind of forced to take on this job and just to stay employed at this point. So Laura is to turn to Will like, yeah, old guy. And Will is to be like, yeah, old guy. So Will goes on and like, well, I better be getting back at this party. And as Will gets up, he stumbles upon Laura and grabs her by the chest. And Laura's like, you did that on purpose. And Will's like, no, like, I'm married. So, like, if anything, like, I'm safe. And Laura is looking at Will. It's like, well, what makes it so you being married is to say that you're safe? And I was like, oh, you got me there. Touche. So Laura ends up giving Will this handkerchief and is to tell Will, it's like, hey, clean yourself up before you go. So Will is to kind of pat himself down. Laura is to kind of adjust his blazer and try to get any last resemblance of sweat and anything kind of left maybe by that brush that he made his way through here to get to Laura. So As Will leaves, he passes by the barn and there's a horse that realizing that Will is to have a seemingly unattractive nature to all these animals, and Laura is to go on and notice that, and eventually later on she is to go on and re-mention that how like it seems that animals don't like Will, so why is it that he tries so much so to get near them? So Will makes his way back to Charlotte and Stuart, and Stuart is to just be like, Will, like, what did he say? Like, we've been going nuts, we've been worried. And so Will ends up breaking it to Stuart that's like, oh, well, you had gotten my job. And Stuart is like, wait a minute, like, he called me this evening and told me he wanted me to take the job. And I said, it's like, well, Will, that's Will's job. Like, like I didn't think he was serious. And so Stewart turns to Will. It's like, well, hey, say the word and I'll turn the job down. And Will turns to Stewart and is to go on and be like, I think this is at one point in time where I can't go on and advise you to do anything because I'm not in a position to. And so Stewart turns to Will. It's like, well, shit, like that was the one thing that I hope that you didn't say. So Will and Charlotte are driving on home, and the whole entire time, Charlotte is calling Stewart a prick and like how could he have gone on and done that behind your back and this and that uh, and and how could this guy walk away guilt free and so on and so Will turns to Charlotte and it's like, you know what, like I don't want to talk about this right now, like it's too fresh, like the bullet wound is just too deep right now, metaphorically. This is paraphrasing here, but yeah, Will really doesn't want to go on and go into this, but Charlotte will not like give up on it. And Charlotte is going and turn to Will like, well, can I just say one more thing? And Will's like, no. And so the following morning, Charlotte is to set her alarm for 7:30, and Will is to overhear this alarm as he wakes up and is to turn to Charlotte. It's like, hey, how about you set the alarm clock for 8 o'clock? Because I think that's when I'll go on and I'll just get up then. As it seems that Will is to have a whole entire day off at this point here. So Will then goes back to sleep and is to be woken up at 7:40. He turns to Charlotte and it's like, well, hey, I thought I told you to get me up at 8. Like, why are you going on and not letting me sleep? And Charlotte is to turn to Will. It's like, this is 7:40 at night. You've been sleeping for a good 12 hours. What are you doing? Like, are you sick? Like, are you okay? And Will's like, you know what? I actually feel good. I actually feel great. So both Will and Charlotte are sharing a bit of meal here, and so Charlotte is going on and talking about her job, how she is to state that some people are going on and talking to her and talking down to her because of her gender and this and that, whatever have you. And so eventually, Will just takes his wife Charlotte and is to grab her, and they start dancing. Then Will positions Charlotte onto this couch like thing and starts to disrobe her. And because they had been having stew at the table, Charlotte is to ask Will, it's like, what was in that stew? So, as Will starts to disrobe Charlotte here, and they go into passionate lovemaking, we then transition to Will being in the bathroom, and he notices that his bite mark ends up having quite a bit of hair around it. So, Will takes the scissors and starts to trim away at that excess amount of hair. So, Will makes his way into the office and is to notice a guy named Gary who is to go on and have quite a bit of tequila this morning. And Will is to definitely sniff it off of him. Gary is to go on and be like, no, I didn't have alcohol this morning. And Will is like, sure you didn't. So Will goes on to make his way into the office, and it seems that Mary is to have found out what had happened to Will because she had found out from Stuart. Will had also gone on and asked Mary if Stuart was in the office, and Mary says that he was in there within an hour ago. It seems that somehow Will could probably go on and still smell that Stuart was in the office at some point within this day. So, after Will has a bit of conversation with his secretary, he makes his way into his office and starts speed reading uh, like these letters to just continue to just do his job, regardless of how he's realized he's to probably lose it. Roy makes his way into the office and it's to go on and be like, I want to say, I think this sucks. And so Will turns to Roy. It's like, well, thank you, Roy. So, oh, we also had an early part in this movie where I think Will, probably the reason why he got fired, is he ended up telling some 14-year-old author that he didn't agree with her kind of working with them, and come to find out that this 14-year-old author had made a huge splash elsewhere, and so that could be a reason for contention for why Will had gone on and probably had a reason to have lost his job, but also because of this merger, they probably wanted to go on and just kind of change the guard anyways. But moving on, as well as also just Stuart nagging about getting Will's job probably also didn't help things. So, but back to the situation here. Roy used to notice that Will, it seems, is speed reading these papers, and Will normally has glasses to read them. And Will is like, yeah, like, I guess I don't really need my glasses. It's very weird. But Will is to state that he had slept really good yesterday, and like maybe that is to go on and be the cause of this. And Roy is to turn to Will. It's like man, you had slept so good that you didn't need glasses to read your papers. And Will's like, well, good point. So Will heads outside the office to then start to notice that he has other special abilities. That he's to go on and hear from a wide distance within this office, the hustle and bustle. So we have Gary at one point who is to admit that he was to have had a bit of tequila with his coffee, and that oddly Will was to be the one that noticed it. And there are people that are going on and saying that, okay, yeah, definitely Will is out and Stuart is in. And so the further that Will is to go on and overhear all of this, he makes his way back into his office, and Will ends up asking Mary to get Gary on the phone so that way he can talk about animal possession. So Gary ends up going on to figure out exactly who is the most renowned person in this field of animal possession. And eventually, Gary is to go on and point out this doctor. Um, and the book Something Wild. So, after Will and Gary both have this conversation with one another, and I believe this doctor's name is Dr. Alzaz. By the end of this, Will turns to Gary and says, "Hey, when you go on and you tell people that you had tequila with your coffee, you also have to go on and actually to have had coffee that morning because you didn't." So Will hangs up the phone, and then Gary is to think that his phone is to be wired or tapped. So he like kind of grabs his phone, kind of looks up, and is to try to see if he can find some microphones somewhere. Will goes on home to get his messages as his wife is to go on and make his way to New Haven. So since Charlotte is to go on and be away, Will makes his way through the clothes of his closet and gets a big old whiff of one of them and realizes unusually that Charlotte's clothes has Stuart's scent on them. So this has Will get very upset and very aggressive in nature. And so Will makes his way to Stuart's place and ends up hitting this intercom, and Will says to Stuart, it's like, "Hey, I'm Will," like, and so Stuart is like, "All right, like, I'll come on down." So as Stuart opens this door, and Stuart is kind of in the way of this door, Will pushes Stuart out of the way, and Stuart is just kind of curious of what's going on here, what's wrong. So Stuart goes on to make his way up the stairs, and Will makes his way up the stairs, and Stuart follows. Stuart grabs Will by the shoulder, and Will in turn bites into Stuart for how he is to place his hand upon him. So Stuart is just like, "What the heck?" And so we start to see Will galloping through this staircase to open this door, whereas Will is to figure out that Charlotte, almost disrobed, is to be curious what Will had come to the door for. And Charlotte meets Will and realizes that the jig is up. Will walks away, makes his way downstairs, and is to leave. And Stuart makes his way to Charlotte and apologizes, and Charlotte is to say that I'll get dressed. So Will at this point is ticked. So Will is to go on and go to Mary to ask about every uh, author that he can possibly get and everything that he can possibly do to try and keep his job, to try to ruthlessly figure out ways to get Alden on his side to be able to get more money and to be able to get his job back and be able to have like like, well, hey, I'm not gonna lie down and just take this. So we have Will making his way to Stuart here, and because Will is packing an Uzi, it seems to be the metaphor of which that he uses uh, to Mary. So as Will makes his way to Stuart, Stuart goes on to state, like, Will, like, what do you want? Like, I'll resign today. Like, I'll never see Charlotte again. Like, just tell me what you want me to do. And so Will turns to Stuart. It's like, well, how about you just resign today? And Stuart is like, well, I can't do that. And Will's like, well, why did you say it? And Will's like, well, I guess uh, I just wanted to just tell you anything that you wanted to hear, really. And and then also, like, for how really just bad I feel about what a shit I am. So Stuart is to tell Will, it's like, you know what, I love you, Will, and I know how this sounds, but I do. And I know how much I've hurt you, and it kills me. Yeah, I'm sure he's just playing violins and just so saddened. But yeah, um, so Stuart is to ask Will for forgiveness, and Will is like, "No, I won't forgive you." And so Stuart is to say to Will, "It's like, well, you know what? Like, how about we go on and we try to work this out? How about I go on and I go to Alden and I tell him that whole Eastern Europe thing? Let's forget about all that. Like, let's keep you on as some kind of consultant. Maybe I can do that for you." And Will is just like, "I'm gonna get you, Stuart. I'm coming for you." Like, you just wait. Like, you just enjoy the life that you think that you've had, because it's all gonna get frickin' taken away, piece by piece. That's what I wish he would have said. Like, Will should have got on and told, like, Stuart, it's like, I'm going to haunt you. So Will makes his way back to Roy and Mary here, and he starts planning things out. And Will is to state that there's a possibility that they're going to leave and take all these authors with them. And Will is stating that he has investors that they're going to go on and have their own entrepreneurial business, their own separate business from this firm. And Roy is to look at Will and just be like, well, is any of this actually true? And Will is like, I don't really think it is, or I don't really know. I'm just saying this so that way we can try and steal some authors away from this business as we're making our way out. And Roy is like, oh my god, you are a god. So Will turns to Mary here. It's like, well, hey, let's begin with Maud because we know that she's going to go on and be on our side. So we'll begin with her. So Will makes his way to Alden's place, and Will is to go on and tell Alden that he's turning down the Eastern Europe position, and Alden is like, well, Will, I assumed that you would, and Will wanted to do this face to face and just be like, well, okay, well, I'll see you again, Alden. So in all honesty, like, Will was just going to Alden's place to actually just see reasonably Laura here. He didn't give a about Alden. So Will goes on to notice Laura, and she is riding this horse. So Will is to go on and be so tempted to want to go on and see Laura and get closer to this horse, but as he goes on and tries to do said thing, this horse ends up running wild, and Laura, with while being upon this horse, ends up getting bucked off. So Will runs to Laura, and Laura tells Will, it's like, don't you realize that animals hate you? Like, that they go crazy around you? And so Alden runs his way to Laura here, and like, well, yeah, like, it's been such a long time since seeing you get bucked off a horse like that. And so, as Alden realizes that both Will and Laura are both kind of chatting it out here, Alden's like, I don't know if Will is gonna go on and end up being with Laura, and Alden doesn't quite uh, accept if this relationship is to go on and happen, because Alden is to go on and look at Will and just be like, well, hey, if the two of you end up together, like, Will doesn't really have a job or anything to his name, so Alden is to disapprove of Will. So, but if anything, Laura is to look at Alden and just be like, well, hey, like, me and him are gonna go on and have dinner together. Like, aren't we, Will? And Will's like, okay, sure. And so Will goes to Laura's place that is just a guest house that is to be left for her. We'll go on and find a number of pictures that are to be around the house that are to go on and be of either her, Laura herself, or a part of the family. And so Laura then turns to Will and explains that all she has is like just peanut butter and jelly and not much else, and so maybe that they should just go on and just cancel lunch because she has nothing available for her. And Will is to go on and be like, well, like, mother's milk is to go on and be my PB and J. Come on, let's go on and let's have this lunch. Because Will doesn't give a flying F. He just wants to be around Laura and just wants to continue to talk to her. So, how long am I going on for? 53 minutes? That's actually pretty decent than I kind of thought here, but I have no idea where exactly we are in the film. And how longer we have to go, I have no idea. So, Will ends up asking Laura what exactly she does. And Laura turns to Will, it's like, well, do you care? And Will is like, no, I'm just making polite conversation, but I thought I would ask. So, Laura's to state that she doesn't really want to discuss what exactly she does do. And Will should go on and be like, well, like, I guess that probably tells a lot about you, and I guess I can figure out who you really are. And so here is where Will busts out the fact uh, that a lot of people have gone on in the past and stated that a lot of people were interested in Laura because she was, of course, beautiful, but then are to go on and find out who she really is, that she's rude, hostile, and sullen, and withdrawn. But even after going on and getting to know all these things about her, people will still go on and still continue to find interest in her because of the way she looks. And Will goes on to surmise that Laura is kind of her own problem. She's her own worst enemy. And Laura in kind states to Will, it's like, well, you know what, that's a great bit of insight, but I didn't come here to be suddenly challenged by you. And so they make their way to the living room. So here is where Will notices that there's a lot of pictures of her in this part of the room of living. And Lauren goes on to explain that since this is always to go on and be Laura's guest house, that Alden thought that it would be a good idea to kind of just have a number of pictures of her within this guest room to just kind of give her the memories of what they're to go on and have. Uh, so Will is to also notice a picture of a man and ask about it. Laura ends up going on to say that that is a picture of her brother and be like, oh, like Will is to be somewhat familiar of what was to happen with her brother and says that it was seemingly an accident. And Laura says no. Her brother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and had ended himself. So, yeah, like not exactly an easy bit of dialogue, but the two of them are going on and being very honest with one another. So, both Laura and Will go on and they're to make their way outside. And so Will is to go on and state that he had gotten bitten by this wolf. And after going on and being bitten by this wolf, he is going through seemingly some changes. That he is to go on and feel way better than he's probably ever felt before, but also he is to start to change and be much more different than he has been before. And him being stronger and more alive. And so Laura's like, well, if you do feel great, like don't treat this as anything more than just a gift. So Will is to say it's like, well, with every gift there's always a price to that said gift. And so there is always to be those people when you look at them and they say like the whole gift and a curse thing, and it is always kind of interesting to just kind of see how a superhero kind of sees themselves as they're to go on and have this enormous kind of weight put on them to think that they should go on and cherish the fact that they are to go on and be special, but then again, with that special ability or whatever kind of thing about them, that that it's going to go on and be something that they are going to really and truly completely benefit from. But if anything, it kind of depends on what that thing is. Like, like some people are to go on and have certain abilities that like are to be super strength or to fly or become invisible and whichever, and like those abilities come with being able to use that to help people. Where it seems that in Will's case, like most of these abilities are to only go on and be very self-serving, or is to go on and actually hurt people, as Will is to fall asleep at night and the full moon is to arise. So yeah, like Will's abilities and the abilities of superheroes would be drastically different in some ways. But moving on. So Laura ends up asking Will if he would like to stay for dinner, and Will states like, well, you know what, it's kind of getting very late. Maybe I should get back. So as Will gets up, he goes on and he starts to just wobble a little bit, and so Laura ends up throwing Will over her shoulder and continues to make their way to her bed. Laura gives Will a thermometer and has realized that it seems that his fever is elevated. So Laura's going on and taking care of Will and saying it's like, well, hey, maybe you should just kind of rest in this bed here, and uh, maybe I'll go on and I'll make you breakfast in the morning. And so Will ends up turning to Laura and saying, like, are you gonna make bacon? And so Laura's like, yeah, I'll make bacon. So Will goes on to fall asleep, and in the middle of the night, the full moon is to arrive. So Will is to start to be growing mutton chops and a number of just kind of hairy things that are to be going along his face. So Will jumps out of this window and starts to make his way through the woods, eventually spotting this deer. So Will, with his yellowed eyes, assessing or assuming that he is to be this werewolf-esque like character, Will starts chasing after this deer, and he goes on to chase it so that he's even jumping over this tree branch. Very unusual, but this occurs. Also, in the distance, we realize that this is not actually going on at night. It makes no logical sense, in my opinion. But, anyways, I've already kind of stated that at some point. So, Will finally goes on, hunts down this deer, breaks its neck, and consumes it. Wakes up near this bit of pond and is to thrust his head into this water and then realize, like, what the heck am I doing here? Will runs to his car to then escape to this doctor to figure out what had happened to him. Laura eventually later on will be very upset that Will had disappeared, but eventually Will go on to explain that. Will goes to the doctor and states that Will had probably gone on to do some sleepwalking and had bumped his head. There seems to be some lacerations there. And uh, the doctor is seemingly interested in doing some kind of scans and EKGs and what have you, and that Will should probably go on and stay overnight because Will could possibly have a concussion. And Will is to tell the doctor, it's like, well, hey, I feel great. Like, no one who's feeling in this condition should have any kind of concussion or anything like that. So maybe Will was just sleepwalking, it seems. He's to kind of walk it off. So Will makes his way to meet up with Alden. And so now we have a bit of this conversation here where Will is to have gone on and had his planning come to full fruition, as Alden is to go on and uh, talk to Will about uh, possibly reconsidering the stuff that Will had said, that Alden had said to Will before about him having tastes and individuality, and Alden is to say to Will, it's like, well, hey, maybe I can go and overlook that, and because Alden has realized how ruthless Will has been lately to try to keep his job. So we go on to have Alden, who's to seemingly be talking to Will to have a new contract for Will's job to be signed here. And Will is like, well, hey, if I go on and I do this, I want excess amount of monies, and I want excess amount of this, and an excess amount of additional powers. And the attorney is looking at Will. It's like, I don't think I can do that. And Alden's like, well, I think we can do that. Like, I think we can kind of do anything that he says. And Alden wants to break it to Will, or Will. La, 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 la. Alden wants to break it to Stuart that Will has gone on to take back his job. And Will tells Alden, it's like, no, 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 no. Like, I want to make sure that this deal is to go on and be a thing, and then I will break it to Stuart about all this. So Will makes his way back to Mary, gives her the thumbs up, and is to go on and grab a bit of meat off of this sandwich, and so Will is to ask if there are any appointments that he's to not quite be aware of, and Mary ends up stating that there is an appointment with Dr. Alzeus, the mystic, the guy who is to go on and know about werewolves, and it is to go on and be at 4 o'clock. So, Will makes his way to this doctor, and the doctor is to go on and say, would you like some tea? So, they make their bit of way of conversation here, and they end up talking and saying words like auspicious and so on and so forth. And so we have Will that is talking to this doctor here and asking whether there's a possibility that there could be some kind of chemicals released from off of a wolf bite, and that maybe there could be something that the common doctor or scientist has overlooked. And the doctor is to go on and talk about how there is an explanation for Will's symptoms, and it could be the fact that he is becoming a wolf. And Will doesn't quite want to believe something like that. And the doctor is like, well, why don't you believe in it? Like, man has only been out of the jungle for 25,000 years. Life is mystical, and uh, and we just have to get used to it. So we go on here, and the further and further this conversation is to go on, and sweet and lows and sugars and honeys are to go on and be debated about what Will want in his coffee, but then the doctor realizes that he's all out of honey, but he just wanted to go on and offer it because it's to be polite. So Will is to want to go on, and since he's to possibly realize that this doctor is to think that he's to become a wolf, Will is to ask if there are specific rules and stuff to abide by when having this process happen. And this also goes on to lead to having Will ask this doctor if there's any way to prevent this, or to have some kind of way of uh, of uh, to stop what he would go on and call the metamorphosis of becoming a werewolf. And so the doctor goes on to explain that there are herbs and rites and amulets, but he doesn't have herbs or rites. So he does state that he has this amulet that he can give Will here, and so Will takes it. And the doctor goes on to explain that Will needs to put this amulet on and have it touch his skin for it to supposedly work. Which Will barely do in this film, or when he does do it, like, I don't think it really does much of anything. The doctor goes on and explains that this amulet could go on and weaken Will or give him great pain. But hey, what does he exactly know? It could just be this amulet that does nothing, which it really just goes on and doesn't exactly do a lick of much of anything. So Will is to accept this amulet and just be like, well, like, what should I give you in return? And the doctor is like, no, like, accept it as a gift. And the doctor is to say to Will, it's like, well, hey, like, since you, it seems, are to go on and be a man becoming a wolf, like, how about you go on, you do me a favor? So the doctor is to explain to Will that it seems that he is being close to death, and that if Will can grant this man one favor, and it is for him to be bitten by Will so he can become a wolf himself. And Will is to go on and notice that the doctor is to pull out his arm, and Will is to look at it like, I just can't do something like this. And the doctor's like, okay, like, I understand. The doctor says, keep the amulet. Like, if you decide to believe, like, perhaps you will give me your gift after all. And the doctor states to Will that it is a privilege to finally see someone like Will, who is to go on and seemingly be this werewolf. Will makes his way back to his place, takes the amulet, and puts it on this mirror. And Will then goes on to try and call Laura. Laura ends up, of course, being upset by, like, well, hey, you just kind of disappeared last night. And Will ends up trying to explain to her what had happened. He had went to the doctor. He had a bump in the head. And Laura's like, well, why didn't you come to me and I would have taken care of you? And Will's like, well, you've already kind of taken care of me enough. Like, I wasn't to want to go on and meet with you again to be more of a burden. So Will is to try to make amends here and just be like, okay, uh, like, how will we go on and meet one more time? And Will is to also kind of get annoyed at the fact that Laura is to be brushing her hair, and Laura is to ask Will, it's like, you can seriously hear that? And Will's like, yes, I can. So Will ends up stating to Laura that he's to go on and be at the Mayflower, and that they should go on and the two of them share dinner tomorrow. And So Laura's like, okay, like I'll meet you and we'll have dinner together, but you better look like you fell. And Will turns to Laura, it's like, or says to Laura, it's like, I do and I will. Room 825. So, bizarrely here, we have Will that is to go on and look at the mirror and say, I'm not only the president of Hair Club for Men, I'm also a member. Like, what does this even mean? I guess it's probably to be a joke that he's gonna go on and turn into a werewolf, so he might as well be involved in the Hair Club for Men. So, we again go on to have night passing and scenery shots of the world. And Will makes his way outside and is to make his way to this closed zoo. We see a lion, we see chimps, we see bears. Oh my. So, these two police officers are jumping this gate of this closed zoo and making their way to meet with Will to try to arrest him here. Not quite sure why exactly these police officers have to run into a closed zoo. Like, logically, would there be some kind of security system or some kind of something that is to go on and tell these people that Will has made it into this? I'm just drawing at straws here. You would think there'd be some kind of security guards or security system or some kind of something. I guess not. So we kind of find out that one of these security guards is actually David Schwimmer, the guy from Friends, the guy who plays Ross. So the cops find Will here and they try to arrest him. I said arrest him. So one of the cops tells Will to spread his legs and lick his sack, and not exactly. This is the weird reference I have to just make here from Dave Chappelle, his stand up. So the cop pats Will up and down and realizes that he's clean, and so Will goes on and gets away from the cop as he has one handcuff hand or Will has one hand handcuffed and is to jump away from these cops. And so the cops are like, did you just see that? Did you just see that guy just jump so high and get away from us? And David Schwimmer's character turns to the other cops like, yeah, and he has my cuffs. So Will continues to make his way through the park here underneath this bridge, and there are three men following him, consistently saying like, hey man, have you got any money? I was like, can you borrow me $20, man? Like, blah, 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 blah. So Will's to go on and overhear these guys consistently asking about money, and Will is like, well, all of you want money? And so the guy is like, yeah. So one of the men whip out this gun, and Will is like, well, I got $1,000 in my wallet. Like, how much would you like to borrow? And they're like, well, give me your wallet. So Will goes on to grab some of the men and start consuming them. And the next thing we see is Will accepting a phone call while in his bed. So Will is talking to a woman named Alice who is giving him an 8 o'clock phone call for him to wake up. So Will is to state that he went to bed so early that he doesn't even remember when exactly he went to bed. So Will makes his way to Alden and his attorney, and it seems that they're going on and signing the contract. So Will ends up turning to Alden and is like, well, it's a pleasure doing business with you, sir. So Will goes on and tries to find where Stewart is, and coincidentally, he's in the bathroom. And so Stewart ends up telling Will about how uh, Stewart had gone on to talk to Alden about the whole consulting position, and Stewart is to say that the consulting position is less money anyways, but also so is the Eastern Europe position. And Will's estate to Stewart is like, well, you know what? Like, I have a better offer on the table. And Stewart is like, well, really? From what other job? And Will is to say, well, this one. And Stewart is like, well, I don't really understand. And Will is to turn to Stewart like, well, I did the same thing you did. So Will is to state that since Will is to have so much spare time lately, that he had figured out a way to best Stewart here. And so Stewart turns Will, it's like, well, I guess I owe you some congratulations. And Stewart turns Will, it's like, well, I guess the best man won here. And Stewart is like, well, like, it's kind of glad that this had gone on to happen because I think I couldn't go on and give up my position. And he didn't like how the way things ended. So Stewart is hoping that they can work together and everything will go back to normal and let bygones be bygones. And Will turns and is to whip himself out and is to tell Stewart that he's firing him. And Stewart is like, well, you can't do that, it'll ruin me. And Will is to state to Stewart, like, well, it's the best thing for the firm. And Stewart is like, well, give me a few months. Let me see I quit. And Will is like, no, I'm doing what's best for the firm, which is getting rid of you. So, and also Will had told Stewart that he's coming for him, that he's going to get him. And so Stewart says that Will is a son of a bitch and that he's the best thing for this firm. And here is where Will goes on and whips out his schwanz and starts spraying all over Stewart here. Stewart is like, what the heck did you do that for? And Will states that he's marking his territory and that Stewart got in the way. Stewart ends up going to the paper towels like classy, like nice, like thanks for peeing all over my shoes. So Stewart leaves, and so Will makes his way to the sink and washes his hands, realizing that there is on his handkerchief a blot of blood. And then Will starts to make his way through his blazer coat to realize that there are fingers left within his blazer. Will rushes out of his office to make his way back to the Mayflower, his hotel, and he's to be met by Charlotte here. And so Charlotte goes on to tell Will about how the affair that she had meant nothing to her. And so Will is to go on to realize, like, well, hey, well, if like an affair like that meant nothing to you, then what does our relationship really mean? So eventually, Charlotte is to go on and try to grab Will and trying to continue to talk to him. And Will turns to Charlotte like, well, don't touch me. So Charlotte is to go on and leave and be fairly upset, Laura is to go on and overhear this and be like, aha, like I guess he's to go on and not be as married and happy as we thought he was. So Will makes his way to his room to grab his amulet and put it on his chest and to be touching it against his skin. Laura makes her way to Will's room and is to give a good knock on the door. So, as Laura is to continue to talk to Will, Will is to state that he is to go on and not want to see Laura right now. So, Laura is to say, like, hey, don't do this to me twice. Like, open up. So, Laura ends up noticing that there is a cleaning lady, and so Laura is to grab this cleaning lady to get this door unlocked. So, Laura ends up coming in to find Will handcuffed to this radiator, and Laura is very baffled and very confused about how Will is to have these handcuffs. Like, hey, where'd you get those? And Will has no clue. And so Laura's like, where's the key? And Will's like, I don't know where the key is. So I kind of accidentally adjusted something here as I pulled on a wire. I apologize. So Will is to go on and state that it's getting fairly late here, and that he thinks that he's dangerous, especially at night. And Laura is asked, well, it's like, well, like, so you think that you're gonna go on when it gets dark, you're gonna attack me? And so Will is to state that he's thinking that he's turning into something else. He almost says werewolf, but then he's to go on to be like, I don't want to quite say werewolf. Because that'll just make him sound like a crazy person, even though he's technically to sound like a crazy person anyways. So Laura's to say, like, well, into the thing that bit you, like a wolf. So if Will will not go on and admit it, Laura is to just straight up say it, that it's like, so you're gonna become a werewolf? Like, that's where we're having contention here. So Laura is to want to go on and not have Will be handcuffed to this radiator. And so since Will is to not go on and have keys to these cuffs or know how he got them, Laura is to be like, well, what's your plan to just for the rest of your life be cuffed to this radiator and that's all you're gonna do? And then Will's like, oh, I didn't think anything beyond that. So Laura is to go on and realize that she, from all the life experience that she used to go on and have, is to find a paper clip and is to use it to try and uncuff Will here. So Laura is trying to go on and uncuff Will, and Laura is to tell Laura, or no, Laura is to tell Will that that she does like him because he is a good man, and that's very exotic to her. And that Laura is to realize that since Will is to look at Laura the way that he does, like she is to go on and like that about Will. And so Will is to say to Laura that he doesn't think of himself as a good man. And because why would this go on and happen to him because he assumes that only bad people ends up getting curses. And Laura say it's like, well, no, not at all. If anything, actually, the good people are the one that gets curses, because it kind of is to go on and even build their character even so much more so. So, like, the worst things happen to the best people. So, Loris will also say that maybe Will isn't probably to go on and become a werewolf whatsoever. That maybe it's just in his head. Maybe he's sick. Maybe he just needs to go on and speak to a therapist or some other way of helping him here or there. And so finally, Laura then goes on to uncuff Will here, and then decides to cuff him behind his back. And so Will is a say to Laura, it's like, well, it seems that I'm pretty helpless now. And so Laura all of a sudden notices the necklace or the amulet that is beheld around Will's neck, and to ask what the heck that this is to go on and be. And Will says to Laura that this is to be his good luck charm. And Laura's like, well, does it work? And Will says to Laura, it's like, well, today doesn't seem to be turning out too badly. And Laura's like, well, yes. So Will is to be thrusted onto this bed as Laura joins him within it. And so the next thing we see is night has to fall. Will has made his way as a werewolf through this park, and he has to go on and howl. And there are joggers and there are homeless people overhearing the cries of Will here. And the next thing we see is both Will and Laura in bed. Detective Bridges and his other uh, detective that is to go on with him is to be making his way to Will's room. So Laura is to answer the door, and the detective Bridges to show his badge to Laura, and is to need to speak with Will. Laura states that Will is in the shower and that he will be out shortly. So Detective Bridges makes his way to go on and speak to Will, and Detective Bridges wants to speak to Will in private, and Will is to look at Laura. It's like, well, this woman is to go on and be my fiance, so anything that you can say to me, you can say to her. So if I were Detective Bridges, I'm like, man, you've kind of moved on pretty fast. But so Detective Bridges goes on to speak to Will and is to state that Charlotte, Will's wife, had died last night. She had been found dead in the park, and Will ends up asking the detective. It's like, well, how did you guys find her? And the detective goes on to state that her throat was torn out. So the natural assumption would be that Will had gone on to quite possibly kill Charlotte because he was in the park last night. But also, there is another gleaming thing that we are to go on and possibly forget. That there seems to be a bitten situation that had occurred earlier in this film that we are to kind of have to acknowledge now. So, Will is to be going on and taking this news rather hard, and Laura is to try to get Will to sit down, but Will is to state, no, I think I'll stand, but then he sits anyways. So, Detective Bridges here is to, of course, do the cliche thing where he goes on and asks Will where he was last night, and where he was yesterday. As Detective Bridges goes on to realize that Charlotte and Will had have a bit of an argument, and this could quite possibly put Bridges to have suspicions that Will had killed his own wife. So, the further and further this questioning starts happening, Laura goes on to explain to Bridges that uh, that her and Will were together all last night, and that she had arrived at like 6:30 and didn't leave his side. And so Laura is to state to Bridges, like, well, maybe you should check the front desk to see if they had not gone and left. And Bridges is like, oh, I will definitely do that. So Bridges to go on and ask Will if he can give them a blood and tissue sample. And Laura's to go on and say, it's like, well, you're not going to get that unless you have a court order. And so Bridges is like, all right, okay, like, I guess we're going to have to go on and we're going to have to leave here. So the two detectives, after they leave, talk to one another and realize that it seems that Will may go on and have an alibi here. And so all then ends up going on to be with Stuart. And they're overhearing on the news that Charlotte's wife had died. And so they're going on and they're possibly thinking that Will, having his wife die here, is to probably be bad press for the firm. And so Stuart is turning to Alden here and is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, since Will is to go on and be taking over Stuart's position that he had not quite yet obtained, Stuart is to think, well, like, if it is to go on and be Will who had gone on to kill Charlotte, like, would Stuart be a really good candidate for Will's replacement? And Alden is like, well, no, unfortunately, Will had decided to go on and say that if something happens to him, that he is to go on and have a successor, which is a guy named Roy. And Stuart is to go on to be like, well, like, if Will does get convicted of these crimes, like, do you think any of the contract that he is to have gone on and signed, do you think any of that will go on to be valid? And all that is to do, be like, well, I guess it wouldn't be. So Stuart is like, well, okay. So if Will does go on and get convicted of these crimes, then screw Will and screw Roy. Because Stuart wants this job and he will do anything to keep it, as well as also to get rid of Will in any way that he can to be able um, to win at life and basically re- take everything away from Will that he possibly can. So we transition here. And so, pause for a second. So Will is to have contemplation that he may have accidentally gone on and could have killed his wife last night. And Laura is to say to Will, it's like, well, weren't you the same guy that I spent the night with last night in bed? And Will turns to Laura, it's like, well, at any point I could have gone on while you were sleeping, and I could have gone on and escaped and left and gone out to the park and killed Charlotte. I could have done it. And so Laura is to go on and look at the bottom of Will's boots and are to notice that they are fairly dirty. And Laura is to just be kind of like, I'm not quite sure. So the cops are going on, or the detectives are going on, and they're talking about uh, that they've identified the girl that Will's with, and it's to be Lauren Alden, and that they're stating that that's one heck of an alibi here for Will. So Laura is to make her way back to her guest house. And so, because the two of them are making their way to Laura's place. So, Laura tells Will that maybe he should duck down because there's a bunch of guards here. So, Laura ends up talking to the first guard, George, and is to go on and have the little bits of greetings and so on and so forth. And then Laura goes on to make her way to meet with another guard uh, and talk about how uh, there had been quite a bit of assumptions that there had been wild dogs present on the grounds because there had been a deer that had been killed. And so Laura is to kind of hear what this guy is saying. You're like, all right, okay. So Will turns to Laura and states that he should definitely go on and get locked up before it gets dark. And Laura states, is like, well, the only place that I can think to lock you up is the barn. And so it's like, all right, the barn sounds good because everywhere else there's windows. So Will confirms to Laura that he's going to try and beat this. And Will is to also tell Laura that her phone is ringing. So Laura is kind of confused why Will is saying that her phone is ringing. And Laura goes to her phone, and convincingly enough, it is ringing. So Laura goes on to find out that the detectives are calling her. So Laura is to go on and ask about the phone calls to just kind of confirm everything. And the detectives state that as soon as he had gone on to try to figure out who Laura was, that he had been ringing her all day. So the detective asks Laura if Laura and Will are going to come down to the station to give the statement that he wanted, and that possibly will actually go on and give the and blah, blah, blah. Laura's to go on and ask the detective whether or not that they need blood or tissue samples, and the detective goes on and says like, well, we're not going to waste our time with that, and Laura ends up asking why. The detective states that it seems that the DNA samples were all canine, and so there's no way that they can have the ability to match with anyone. So Laura is to quite find that to be odd. And so Laura makes her way back to her car to find Will there, and Laura ends up getting a bit of a shock, as Will is to be quite behind her. So Laura ends up telling Will, it's like, yes, you're right, the phone was ringing. And Laura is to state that on the phone it was to be the detective. So Laura is to say to Will that there's a possibility that she's going to get subpoenaed if she doesn't go down to the station. And so Laura has to go to the police station to give a statement tonight. And Laura asks Will if it'll be alright if she goes. And Will is like, yes, it'll be fine. And Will state, don't look so scared. Uh, Maybe there's going to be a happy ending that is to turn out of all this, believe me. So Will ends up kind of saying this heartbreaking statement where he goes on and states, like, I've never loved anyone this way. I've never looked at a woman and thought, like, if the world ends, I'm still, or I'll still understand what God meant if I'm with her. That I'm a little, I think I lost that statement somewhere. So Laura goes on and chains up Will in the barn and makes her way to the detective's office. So it seems that also that the detectives had gotten a call uh, from Will's best friend wanting to also go on and make a statement as well. And so the detective turns to Bridges and like, well, I guess you're gonna have a really busy night. And and the detective Bridges states that like, well, yeah, I guess it's a full moon out, I guess. Like so, Laura is to be driving her way to the detective's office, as Will, it seems, is to be going through his transformation into a werewolf. So Laura is to go on to this detective's office and to be hearing the cries of a woman who is to have lost her kid because this woman had gone on to be the person who had lost her kid earlier from Will eating those people. So because there had been a loss of fingers is the evidence of that occurring to match the thugs from before with this woman who's talking about what she's talking about. So as Laura's making this appointment, she bumps into none other than Stuart. So Stuart tells Laura, as she, of course, obviously doesn't know him, his name and that he's a friend of Will's. And Stuart ends up mentioning how this is a terrible thing and that Stuart himself is shocked over what has kind of transpired recently. And Will is shocked by this because he states that Will to Stuart is more than a friend, he's a mentor. And so Laura is to turn to Stuart and be like, oh, yeah, you're the one who's his protege. And so we have Stewart that is to go on and is to state that it's a pleasure meeting her, because eventually Stewart will have to go on and make his statement. Oddly, Stewart goes on and takes a big old whiff of Laura and says that it's an interesting scent that she has. So Laura goes on and thanks him, and then goes on to ask Stewart if he's gone on to have been bitten. And Stewart is like, well, why would you ask such a question like that? That's a fairly odd one to ask. And Laura is to say, it's like, well, I don't know. When people are bitten, it's often on the hand. And so so the so the two of them are going on and asking why the two of them are here, so on and so forth. Yeah, so after Stewart is to need to go on and leave here to give a statement, Stewart is to tell Laura that the two of them should get coffee after this, and uh, they should uh, chat. And Laura's like, "Oh yeah, we definitely will." And Stewart tells Laura, "It's like, well, don't break our date now." And Laura's like, "I won't." So Stewart goes into the detective's office, and Laura runs out of the office and gets the heck out of there. So Stewart goes on and talks to the detectives and mentions how this is easy, that Will's a dear friend to him. But so Will starts going in to talking about Will and starting to throw him under the bus. So Stewart is to mention to these detectives that him and Charlotte had this affair, and that Will had found out. So we transition here to have Laura, and she's on the phone, and she's trying to get 2 tickets to the airport for them to get the heck out of there, because Laura realizes that Stewart is probably going to go on and be after them. Stewart is to probably try and track down Laura's scent and come after them. So that's why Laura is scrambling to try and get Will and have them escape. So Will is going on in the barn and having his amulet being shown here. And we then transition back to Stewart. And so Stewart is to go on and say that Will was like a madman, and that at one point Will had bitten Stewart, and that Will had also urinated on Stewart's shoes, and Will had said to Stewart at one point that he wanted to kill him, or no, that Will wanted to kill Charlotte, and that Stewart didn't believe what Will said, and that Stewart is to go on and blame himself. So we have Stewart that is to go on and say here that if they go on and if they arrest Will, that Stewart is willing to go on and testify and defend against Will to make sure that he goes away. And the detectives are to go on and understand what Stewart is saying here. And so we have Stewart that is to ask whether or not that, or I think either the detective or Stewart ends up asking exactly where Will's whereabouts is, and supposedly that they're to lead them to possibly have suspicions that Will is to be at Alden's place. So the detectives are to go on and be like, well, like if Laura is right outside, then maybe we should go on and ask her that. So they make their way outside the office to call for Laura, and she's not there. And one of the officers in the blue collar officers goes on to state that she had gone on to leave. And so the detective Bridges goes on and says, like, well, that's kind of strange, but he's like, well, we don't really need her anyways. Like, this Stewart guy is basically their smoking gun. So, uh, we have the detective just kind of having no real importance of whatsoever Laura needing to say anything here, or them chasing after her. So, Stewart gets into his car, making his way to Alden's place. So, Will is to be at the barn, laying down, and Stewart is making Stewart. Laura is making her way back to her place, and so Laura ends up telling George to let nobody in uh, without calling her, and she means no one. And so, as Laura further makes her way back to her guest place, or back to her barn, one of the guards mentioned that the horses are very restless tonight, and uh, and Laura's like, well, that's okay, just kind of stay clear of the barn tonight. So here's where Stewart makes his way to uh, to this first guard here. So George ends up asking Stewart here, it's like, well, can I help you? And Stewart ends up saying that he's here for Mrs. Alden. And George is like, well, I'm afraid I'll have to call first. And he's like, well, may I ask what your business is? And Stewart ends up saying, it's like, well, it's for pleasure. Like, she looks like the F of the decade. And George is like, okay, back up. And so what ends up happening here is Stewart ends up running George over and crashing through this gate, making his way further into trying to find Laura and Will here. So what ends up happening is Stewart ends up finding the second guard, who I believe his name is Tom here. And the guard, Tom, ends up meeting with Stewart and saying, like, well, can I help you? And Stewart says, like, well, I'm here to see Mrs. Alden. And the guard says that it seems that Stewart is to not actually be expected. And oddly, we go on to have Stewart who's to state that he has some card that says that there's an appointment on it. So As this guard goes on to take the card to try to read it, Stuart lunges at him and bites his neck and kills him. Will is trying to go on to go against this barn cage and is starting to grab onto it to try to escape here. He probably can smell Stuart nearby, so he's very concerned. So, Laura makes her way through her guest house to then start to notice that guards have been killed here. Laura then ends up getting grabbed from behind from Stuart, and so Stuart says to Laura, it's like, well, hey, if you scream, I'll kill you, I'll just break your neck. So Laura ends up asking Stuart how he had gotten in, and Stuart had stated how he had smooth talked the guard. And so Stuart ends up asking Laura if she knows, and I mean knows, if Laura is to know what exactly is going on with Stuart, and the further and further the two of them are playing games with one another, and Stuart is to quite get annoyed, and Laura is to go on and probably figure out what had happened to Charlotte. So the two of them have this back and forth together, and at some point Stuart has to state here that he is willing to want to go on and take Laura and try to take her by force here. So I think Laura goes on and nutshots Stuart and then tries to run away from him. She goes to the barn, and when Stuart makes his way within the barn, she gets a fire extinguisher upon him and starts to spray. We have Laura that tries to use this fire extinguisher against Stuart here, and Laura tries to make her way to Will, trying to free him. But so, what ends up happening is that Stuart ends up grabbing Laura, throwing her to the ground, and Will is trying to jump high enough so he can get out of the cage. So, what ends up happening here is that Stuart is consistently throwing Laura to the ground, almost undressing her, and Will finally does go on and get out of this barred cage, jumping so high enough that he is to almost land near Stuart for them to have this duke out. So, werewolf by werewolf fight is going on here. We have a point where there is to be this pitchfork thing that is going on here, where Stuart is to grab this pitchfork and they're fighting. So, at one point, Will gets slashed in the face. I think he also gets stabbed in the side of the chest somewhere, and Will has to pull the pitchfork out. The fighting continues to happen outside, and Stuart falls into this little bit of pond. Will thrusts Stuart into the water, hoping to drown him. Will at some point throws Stuart into these steps, hoping that at this point he is possibly dead, but Stuart will open his eyes back up, and the fight continues. As Stuart makes his way back to Will, we have Laura that comes in with a gun and starts to fire as Stuart is to jump fairly high in the air with these garden shears. So Stuart is to fall back into the pond and have the shears and his arm outside of the pond. And we start to realize that Stuart's hairy hand has become normal and human again. So we then have Will make his way to Laura, touching her face, and then Will realizes that his hands are very hairy and he is still a werewolf here. So Will is to go on to realize that he needs to run off. He needs to run away. That he is a monster. So Will makes his way through the woods and is to tear away clothes and become this more wolf-like creature. So we seemingly have Alden with these detectives making their way through the grounds. And so this leads them to make their way to Laura, where they go on and explain what had transpired throughout the night. And Laura is to state that there had been some airport tickets that had been called for, and that uh, so everything just kind of gets swiped under the rug and explained away. Detective Bridges goes on and says to Laura, it's like, well, hey, maybe you'll finally go to my police station after all and give me that statement that I wanted. And Laura's like, well, sure, I will. So we go on to have Laura at one point who's to notice that the Detective Bridges had gone on to be drinking quite a bit here, and he had had some vodka tonics, and Bridges to go on at a distance to say, it's like, well, how does it that she know that we were drunk? And we go on to have Laura turn and say, like, because I can smell it on you. I can smell it from a mile away. So, as Laura's eyes is to change to seemingly a more brighter yellow, and we realize, like, all right, like, Laura is going to eventually turn into this werewolf. So, the last thing we end up seeing in this film is Will fully emerging from a wolf man to then wolf. Howling goes on. We see Laura's eyes turn yellow, and the credits roll. So, with that said, I'm going to go on and try to get out of here so I can put this as a review. I really did want to go on and re-explain everything that happened further towards the end there, especially when we got to the Laura and the detective thing. I just really wanted to just like, hey, how can we quickly just kind of get this done and over with? But anyways, let me know in the comments below how you felt about this film. If you were to check it out, if you would be a fan of it, if you like it, if you just or to find that you just need X number of minutes or whatever to get through your day, to have something to just watch and what have you. But anyways, I know that people are probably not to go and stick around towards the very tail end of this thing, but I do appreciate if you did. Yeah. I hope to go on and do quite a bit of these monster movies and all these kinds of things in the future. So I hope that people will justify continuing to be on this channel. It seems that there are to be a number of people that are to eventually find these videos, so that is to be nice. When eventually I continue to adjust them and adjust thumbnails and tweak things and go on to then have these certain videos finally find an audience somewhere, it's just really nice. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here so I can go on and do the rest of the things that I would like to try to accomplish within my life. and grind away on some Timu and all kinds of things that I have to go on from every day on to just continue to just be doing the process of doing that throughout my life. Uh, and be able to uh, justify getting different things to have for thumbnails and what have you, and just a nice assortment of items to just have around my room. So with that said, I'm going to tack out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.